Ned Stark stood upon the ramparts of the Red Keep, the sun dipping low over the battlements, staining the sky with hues of fiery orange. Each breath he took felt heavier than the last, as though the air itself was burdened by the weight of the secrets he carried. King Robert Baratheon was dead. Ned found himself alone in a city that seemed to bristle with quiet menace, its uneasy calm only a veil over the roiling ambitions of the Lannisters, the Tyrells, and every courtier with a hunger for power. Yet through the turmoil that threatened to swallow them, Ned knew one truth rose above all others: Cersei Lannister's children were not Robert's rightful heirs, and the crown now hovered above a realm poised on a sword's edge. The torches along the wall shuddered in the gentle wind, light flickering across the deep shadows of Ned's lined face. He thought of Robert's last words, of the lie that had carried the realm for so long, and the dire consequences that would come once that lie was laid bare. Honor had always been a burden he bore willingly, yet this time, that honor compelled him to act in a way he had never imagined. If he spoke the truth outright, House Lannister would react with fury and the realm would drown in blood. But if he remained silent, false heirs would assume the throne and the realm would suffer for it just the same. In the hours following Robert's passing, Ned had been offered a choice by the Queen Regent: submit to Joffrey's reign or suffer the consequences of defiance. Cersei had come to him in a swirl of green and gold silk, her eyes hard as jade, her voice dripping with quiet, threatening confidence. In that moment, she had believed Ned to be broken, a northerner out of his depth, consumed by grief for Robert and fear for his own safety. But Ned had exchanged only a few words with her, polite and non-committal, giving nothing away. Her threat had hung in the air like the stench of rot coiling around them. He had let her presume that he would remain silent if threatened or bribed. Then, with measured restraint, he had bowed and walked away, ignoring the triumphant curl that threatened to creep onto her lips. She had assumed his inaction was capitulation. She was wrong. In the days that followed, he set in motion a plan that diverged from every path his honor and sense of duty might have once dictated. He contacted lords and ladies, trusting only those he felt might still hold to the oaths that bound them to the realm's best interest, or at least those who would see an advantage in supporting House Stark. He appealed to the Grand Maester, who listened gravely. He tested the waters with the Master of Coin, who, though quick to recite the crown's debts, seemed intrigued by the notion of a stable, legitimate succession. He even spoke quietly with members of the King's Guard, men sworn to protect the royal line yet also sworn to uphold justice. Some proved more receptive than others. Little by little, the notion of a great council began to take shape. It was an old tradition called upon in times of great upheaval, when the line of succession was murky or when a king's rule hung under doubt. Ned remembered his father's tales of Westeros before the rebellion, of how these councils, few and far between, served as a balancing force when chaos loomed. If the realm's lords gathered, if they heard the truth from Ned himself, if they saw the evidence he had, then perhaps the burden of choosing a rightful king would be shared and the realm might avoid open war. Still, Ned knew it was a desperate gamble. The Lannisters would not sit idle. Yet if any part of the realm yearned to avoid further bloodshed, they might answer the call. On the 7th day after Robert's death, as bells still tolled in occasional mourning, Ned stood before the Iron Throne in the Great Hall. The seat of swords rose behind him like the threat of an ancient beast, cold metal glinting in the flickering torchlight. The hall was not as crowded as it would be for a coronation or a feast, but a respectable throng of courtiers, guards, and attendants lined the aisle. At the foot of the Iron Throne, Joffrey Baratheon, who wore black for his father, looked upon the gathering with a scowl. Beside him stood Cersei, cloaked in an emerald gown. Her hair caught the torchlight, turning it to gold, much like the gilded lion pins that fastened her sleeves. She stood poised, regal, but her narrowed gaze lingered on Ned with open suspicion. Varys and Peter Baelish were not far off, each with a studied neutrality. The small council members arrayed themselves in that uncertain hush, as if the entire throne room braced for an announcement that might rock them to the core. Joffrey's voice rang out, high and trembling with anger he could not hide. He demanded to know why Lord Eddard Stark, the king's hand, though Ned had quietly refused the pin that morning, had called for such an assembly. Ned, swallowing the dread in his throat, spoke calmly. He outlined how the succession had come into question, that the realm's lords needed to gather to affirm or challenge the line in the traditions set forth centuries ago. Cersei's lips parted in indignation, but Ned pressed on before she could interrupt. He did not reveal everything, not yet. He simply said that for the peace of the realm, all of Westeros must be heard, and that King Robert Baratheon had left behind a testament. At that, murmurs spread through the chamber, along with a ripple of surprise. Ned held aloft a parchment, the seal unbroken, and stated it contained the final statement of the late king. Joffrey barked in protest, but Ned only repeated that, by ancient custom, a great council should be convened to consider the matter. The final testament, he said, would be opened in that Council of Lords. The uproar that followed was immediate as expected. Shouts rang out, and though the Kingsguard edged closer to Ned with caution, he was allowed, for the moment, to step back. Cersei demanded the document be handed over. She insisted it was the right of the crown to read her dead husband's final words. Ned demurred. He told them, politely but firmly, that the matter was best decided before the eyes of all of Westeros's great lords. Amid the cacophony of voices, Varys alone managed to speak with an oily, measured calm, acknowledging that summoning the lords to a great council was within the realm of tradition. If Ned Stark had discovered something that cast doubt upon the line of succession, the prudent way forward, if they aimed to avoid war, was indeed to gather every major house. That small concession was all Ned needed. A letter bearing the hand's seal was dispatched to every corner of the realm. The crown's messengers carried duplicates north, south, east, and west, calling upon great and lesser houses alike. Many of those letters, Ned suspected, would be intercepted or remain unread by certain lords sworn to Tywin Lannister or other powerful factions, but enough would surely reach the devout holders of tradition who despised conflict's cost. If the lords came, if they were willing to listen, then a glimmer of hope remained. In private that night, Ned penned a more personal letter to his eldest son. He wrote with a steady hand, albeit one that trembled with emotion. He described the situation in broad strokes, cautioning that the realm hung by a thread. If war came, Ned wrote, the North must be prepared. He also enclosed a note, carefully sealed, for Robb's eyes alone. That note spelled out the dangerous truth about Jon Snow. Ned had labored over every word, fearful that the revelation might tear his family apart. For years, he had borne the shameful rumor of being unfaithful to Catelyn, of fathering Jon on some unknown woman in the south. Now he would entrust his eldest son with the knowledge that Jon Snow was not his child by blood, but the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Ned had never intended for that secret to see the light, but circumstances had changed. The realm needed a rightful claimant. If Robert's children were illegitimate, then someone of Targaryen blood might be recognized by enough lords to quell the chaos. But that was a terrible burden to place upon Jon, or upon any man, let alone a boy raised with no expectation of kingship. 1,000 regrets and misgivings haunted him as he wrote. Yet the only clear path to averting war seemed to be the truth. If the realm discovered that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were not Robert's offspring, they might clamor for a new line altogether. Stannis, as Robert's legal heir, would claim the throne, but his popularity was questionable. Renly might try to seize power through force, as might the Lannisters if they believed they could hold the seat through cunning and gold. Others might rally to Daenerys Targaryen in the east, hearing rumors of dragons and a lost dynasty. But if Ned Stark himself championed a Targaryen, if he could produce proof that the boy had the blood of both wolf and dragon, perhaps the lords of the realm, tired of war from Robert's rebellion, would accept Jon as a compromise. That path was uncertain, but it was better than the alternative. Open war and endless betrayal, the realm bleeding itself dry. Weeks passed as messages went out, and uneasy anticipation took root. Tensions grew daily in King's Landing. The gold cloaks were as likely to turn on Ned's own men as they were to defend him, and Cersei's watchers seemed to lurk around every corner. Still, Ned found an unlikely ally in Ser Barristan Selmy. The old knight, known for his unwavering honor, approached Ned in the cover of night, wearing a plain cloak to mask his Kingsguard armor. He spoke quietly, sorrow coloring every carefully chosen word. He had served the realm for decades, had knelt to kings from House Targaryen and House Baratheon alike, and had somehow managed to keep his honor intact. He told Ned that if the Great Council came to pass, he would speak the truth as he knew it. Ser Barristan did not voice open condemnation of Joffrey's parentage, but Ned could sense he harbored doubts. The famed knight admitted that if the realm had a rightful heir, recognized by the lords and the gods, he would protect that heir as he had sworn to protect every king before. Others, too, made covert approaches to Ned. Some asked after the letter said to be Robert's last testament, seeking to know its contents. Ned refused them all. He asked instead for their presence at the Great Council, urging them to withhold judgment until the realm gathered. Lord Baelish was never far, eyes gleaming with opportunism. He whispered that he could ensure certain lords would attend, for a price. Ned offered no bargains, so Littlefinger turned away, though not without leaving Ned with a knowing smirk. Varys hovered in the corridors, professing only concern for the realm, offering subtle reassurances that messages were indeed traveling. He, too, seemed to sense the storm on the horizon. At last, an unexpected development arrived. Word from the north that Robb Stark had called the banners. Thousands of northern soldiers were marching south, though slowly. Robb's letter, which reached Ned in the capital, spoke of both readiness and caution. The new Lord of Winterfell had no intention of starting a war, but he would not leave his father to the Lannisters' mercy, nor the realm to a false king's whims. The letter assured Ned that if a great council were to gather in King's Landing, or in any neutral ground, House Stark would attend in force, accompanied by other northern lords, all prepared to speak for the truth. Privately, Ned's heart squeezed in gratitude and fear. He did not want to see his homeland soldiers become fodder for a conflict that might still be avoided. But the North's presence might well deter Cersei from arresting him outright. She would not wish to see the city put to the torch or the crown's power threatened while so many other kingdoms still weighed which side to take. These precarious weeks bled into months as lords from across the Seven Kingdoms began to converge upon the capital, albeit with large entourages and warily drawn lines. The Great Council would convene in the Dragonpit, a place large enough to hold hundreds of the realm's lords and knights. Repairs had been hastily done, though the ancient structure still showed its age. It was chosen for two reasons. First, the throne room was too symbolic and perhaps too small for all who would attend. Second, the blackened ruins of the Dragonpit might remind each attendee of the cost of civil war and the demise of dragons. Cersei tried to push back the gathering to delay it indefinitely, but Ned had the support, at least outwardly, of many on the small council. They all claimed to fear chaos if this matter was not settled. Joffrey balked, raging that as king he need not prove anything to anyone, but the presence of so many lords in the city made an abrupt dissolution of the council too dangerous. Even Tywin Lannister had not yet arrived, though rumors suggested he was massing forces in the Westerlands. Meanwhile, lesser Lannisters and sworn bannermen did appear, bristling in their gold and crimson, eyeing the Starks and their allies with open hostility. King's Landing turned into a precarious stage, with factions eyeing one another, alliances forming in secret corners. The city's people continued their daily lives under an uneasy hush, as if they sensed that something monumental loomed just out of sight. For Ned, those days were filled with clandestine meetings and a relentless stream of demands. He still had not shared the full truth with the realm, though rumor had begun to spread that Robert's children might be illegitimate. He needed enough of the realm's most powerful lords in attendance all at once so he could present both evidence and witness. He wished desperately for the help of Stannis Baratheon, who was Robert's heir under the law, yet Stannis had not come. Instead, Renly Baratheon had arrived with a flourish, proclaiming support for the Great Council but also hinting that, if Joffrey were proven illegitimate, the throne should pass to him. He was younger than Stannis but more charismatic, more palatable, or so he claimed. Renly's banners fluttered green and gold throughout the streets, the stag of House Baratheon proudly displayed, and the crowds cheered for him, for he was handsome and open-handed with coin. In the swirl of new arrivals, the Tyrells of Highgarden, the Martells of Dorne, the Tullis of Riverrun, and even the Greyjoys, though only a small entourage from Pike, came forth, some more grudgingly than others. Finally, the northern host arrived, led by Robb Stark himself, with bannermen such as the great John Umber, the Manderleys of White Harbor, the Karstarks, and many others. It was said that the sight of them, tall men in thick cloaks bearing the direwolf sigil, gave pause to the gold cloaks. Ned's reunion with Robb was quiet but filled with an unspoken flood of relief. The boy had grown into a man with a solemnity in his eyes that Ned both admired and mourned. In private, father and son spoke for long hours. Robb confessed that he had received the sealed message about Jon's true parentage. He had not shared it with anyone save Maester Luwin and a few trusted advisors to confirm its authenticity. He asked Ned if it were truly so. Ned, heart-heavy, affirmed it. Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen had wed in secret, or so the story went, and Jon had been born of that union. Ned never confirmed the ceremony to Robb, nor did he have all the details, but the blood was undeniable. Robb asked why now, why share this? Ned could only say that the truth might save the realm. Robb did not protest, though confusion clouded his brow. Jon was his brother, raised beside him, known all his life as Ned's bastard. This revelation did not lessen Robb's regard for Jon, but it unsettled him to know that the quiet boy with the haunted eyes might have a claim to the Iron Throne. They both worried about Jon's reaction, for the letters they had sent to the wall where Jon served in the Night's Watch had gone unanswered. Perhaps they had not reached him, or perhaps he had chosen not to respond. Still, Ned held on to hope that word would find Jon. If he learned what was at stake, maybe he would come. But the wall was far, and the Night's Watch vow forbade him from taking lands or titles. What would Jon do in the face of that vow if the realm asked him to be king? On the appointed morning, the lords gathered in the dragon pit. The black dome structure, cracked and scarred, loomed beneath a gray sky. Though the weather threatened rain, throngs of nobles and knights pressed inside, filling the place with a buzz of speculation and tension. Rows of seats had been constructed around a central open space where those who wished to speak would stand, visible to all. Armed guards, sworn to various houses, lined the edges, but a token of neutrality had been established. The king's guards stood guard at one entrance, while men of the north guarded another, and the city's gold cloaks handled a third. Each group eyed the others warily. Cersei and Joffrey arrived in full regalia, escorted by Lannister men. Tommen and Myrcella were absent, presumably left in the Red Keep for their own safety. Renly, resplendent in green velvet, took a seat with a small crowd of Stormland lords behind him. The Tyrells, led by Mace Tyrell, arrayed themselves near Renly. Clearly they had formed an alliance. Doran Martell had not come in person, but he sent Prince Oberyn, who prowled among the seats with a dangerous grace, the Sun and Spear banner of Dorne at his back. The Tullys, with Catelyn Stark in their midst, sat near the Northerners. The bond of marriage that united Stark and Tully was on display, and Catelyn's presence gave Ned some comfort. She had come late, but she had come prepared to support him. Behind the North stood the Greyjoy envoys, stoic and distant, though Ned suspected they had their own ambitions. More houses filled the seats, each with their petty feuds and alliances. Varys, ever the observer, took a seat near the center, while Peter Baelish drifted from group to group, whispering pleasantries. Grand Maester Pycelle sat stolidly on a hastily assembled dais, the official witness to these proceedings. To one side, Ser Barristan Selmy, in white armor, stood silent and watchful, unwavering in his dedication to the crown, yet which crown he had not yet revealed. The hush that fell when Ned Stark entered was tangible, as if the very air in the dome had congealed, thick with expectation. Ned walked to the open space. He was not clad in armor, but in the simple finery befitting a lord of Winterfell. His gray eyes swept across the gathered lords, taking in their wariness. He began to speak. Softly at first, so that the hush pressed tighter around them, forcing every ear to strain. He spoke of his friendship with the late King Robert, of their shared bonds in war, of the horrors of rebellion and the toll that bloodshed had taken on the realm. He told them how, on his deathbed, King Robert had named Ned Stark as protector of the realm until his heir came of age. Murmurs broke out, eyes turned toward Joffrey, who sat rigid. Ned repeated that the naming was provisional, meant only until the rightful heir was determined. Then, at last, he declared that he had reason to doubt the parentage of the children known as Robert's heirs, Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella. Shouts erupted, raging on both sides. The Lannisters roared in outrage. Many lords voiced shock or disbelief. Joffrey leapt to his feet, face red with fury, but Cersei laid a hand on his arm to restrain him. Some demanded evidence, others clamored that Ned Stark be silenced for daring to speak such treason. Ned simply raised the parchment that he had carried since Robert's death, the late king's testament sealed with the royal sigil. Grand Maester Pycelle and Ser Barristan stepped forward to bear witness. Pycelle, hands trembling, broke the seal. Even as the old man read, his face grew taut with discomfort. He read aloud Robert's last words, naming Eddard Stark as protector of the realm until his true heir came of age, with no mention of Joffrey, Tommen, or Myrcella by name. He called upon the lords of Westeros to keep the peace, to defend the realm's laws, and to ensure that no bastard might sit the Iron Throne. Cersei's voice rang out then, cold and clear, calling Ned a liar, calling the testament a forgery. She urged the lords to discount the words on that parchment as some cunning trick. Her supporters added their voices, demanding that Ned produce proof. They challenged him to show how he knew the children were not Robert's. Did he have witnesses, or was it all rumor? Their demands filled the echoing space until Ned looked across the crowd, found Ser Barristan's stoic expression, and nodded. Ser Barristan stepped forward, his posture straight as a sword. He testified that Robert's children bore none of the Baratheon traits, that he himself had guarded Rhaegar Targaryen's children once, and he knew full well how recessive or dominant certain bloodlines could be. He did not name Cersei's lover, but his statement implied suspicion of incest. He ended quietly by saying that it pained him to doubt the legitimacy of anyone he was sworn to protect, but the realm could not rest on illusions. This sparked more outcry, with some shouting that the King's Guard had no right to judge birth and others calling out for more evidence. Ned produced a book, The Lineages and Histories of the Great Houses of the Seven Kingdoms. He had discovered that every Baratheon in the direct line had dark hair, a trait that carried through countless generations. It was a well-known trait, yet Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella were all fair-haired. The shouting rose, a maelstrom of accusations and doubt. At last, Ned raised a hand, asked for quiet, and the swirling noise subsided to a tense silence. His voice took on a somber edge as he said that Robert Baratheon had another heir by blood, his brothers, Stannis and Renly, yes, but also a more distant and questionable lineage. That was when Renly rose, proudly brandishing the sigil of House Baratheon, insisting that he should be recognized as the rightful king. A wave of Storm landlords cheered, while others looked unconvinced. Ned cast Renly a long, searching glance, then announced that under the law, Stannis, as the elder brother, held the stronger claim if they were to remain within House Baratheon. But Stannis was not there, which triggered fresh speculation and arguments. Some declared the realm would never rally behind a man as stern and joyless as Stannis, while others insisted law took precedence over popularity. The debate threatened to explode. Tempers flared, old grudges reawakened. Lords from the Reach clashed with lords from the Stormlands, the Riverlands, and the North. Ned's hand tightened at his side. This was the chaos he had feared, each faction screeching for their own advantage, no consensus in sight. Then Cersei called loudly that if the Baratheons were unsatisfactory, perhaps the realm should look elsewhere for a rightful king. The Lannister men smirked, implying that Joffrey, no matter his parentage, still ruled in fact, and the realm might prefer him to a man like Stannis. Ned recognized her gambit. If the realm could not unite behind Stannis, it might cling to Joffrey just to avoid civil war. In that fraught moment, a horn sounded near the Dragon Pit's entrance. Dozens of heads pivoted. Through the gate came a figure clad in black, escorted by men in dark cloaks and hoods, the unassuming garb of travelers. The robed figure's face was partially hidden, but as he drew closer, Ned recognized the somber countenance and the dark gray eyes. Jon Snow. He did not come alone. With him were a few members of the Night's Watch, including Samwell Tarly, face pale but determined, and a pair of rangers who bore themselves like men who had seen too much. The hush that descended was electric. No one had expected the Night's Watch to come to a great council. They were supposed to remain at the wall, neutral, apart from the politics of the realm. Yet here they were. The black-clad men stood at the edge of the open space, the Watchers from the north looking distinctly uncomfortable among so many High Lords. Jon stepped forward, nodding respectfully to Ned, then raising his voice for all to hear. He said he had come because he had received word that the realm was on the brink of war over the question of inheritance. He declared that the Night's Watch takes no side in petty quarrels, but if the realm descended into chaos, it would be ill-prepared to face the true threats beyond the wall. This caused a stir, for most gathered there had little concern for the undead or wildling raids. They cared more for the crown. Then Jon's voice wavered only slightly as he spoke again, turning to face Ned. He told the assembled lords that he had learned a secret about his birth, a secret that he had never sought out but which had found him nonetheless. His face clouded with conflicting emotions. He mentioned the vow he had sworn, never to claim lands or titles. The eyes of the gathered lords flickered, uncertain. Many recognized the name Snow, the bastard of Winterfell. What claim could a bastard possibly present? Cersei's laugh rang out, mocking and high. She asked if the realm was now so desperate that it would turn to a bastard of the North to rule. Anger flared in Ned's chest. Before he could speak, Robb Stark stood, steel in his gaze, and said that the boy was no bastard. He had a name, one that had been kept secret to protect him from those who would see him destroyed. Heads turned in confusion, muttering. Some demanded an explanation, others scoffed. A faint tremor ran through Jon as he stood before them all, but he held his ground. At last, Ned stepped forward, laying a hand on Jon's shoulder, and spoke the truth that had haunted him for years. Jon Snow was the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, born in the closing days of Robert's rebellion. Ned Stark had claimed him as his own bastard to spare him the certain death that awaited Targaryen heirs. A tidal wave of noise erupted, the dragonate echoing with gasps, exclamations, curses, and shocked laughter. The tension soared to a breaking point. Some shouted in disbelief that Rhaegar had stolen Lyanna, that their union was an abomination. Others, particularly a few knights who had served under the Targaryens, demanded to see proof. Still others recalled rumors that Rhaegar and Lyanna had loved one another, that they had wed in secret, but those were tales recounted in hushed corners, never proven. Chaos churned in every corner of the structure. Jon's face was grim, as if each accusation struck him like a blow. Ned could only stand resolute, enduring the anger and confusion from all sides. At length, the High Septon, an older man who had arrived with some pomp, ventured forth. He insisted that if this claim of marriage were true, there must be records. Someone must have witnessed the ceremony. Ned explained that it had taken place at the Tower of Joy, deep in the Red Mountains of Dorne. 3 Kingsguard knights had guarded the tower: Ser Gerald Hightower, Ser Oswell Went, and Ser Arthur Dane. All 3 were dead. Lyanna was dead, Rhaegar was dead. The only living witness was Ned himself. His word, he admitted, might not be enough for those who hated Targaryens. Yet in that moment, Oberyn Martell advanced, a slow smile curving his lips. He said that he had heard rumors of Rhaegar's annulment from his Dornish princess, Elia Martell, though it was never confirmed. He had always believed those rumors to be lies, but now he wondered if indeed something had happened. He wanted to see justice for the atrocities committed against his sister Elia and her children. However, if Rhaegar had annulled his marriage, if Elia had been set aside, it was possible that this boy, Jon, might still be legitimate in the eyes of certain lords. A flicker of lethal amusement hovered in Oberyn's dark gaze as he faced the Lannisters, for it had been Gregor Clegane, Tywin Lannister's man, who had brutalized Elia and her children. The tension in the pit deepened as those old wounds were torn open anew. Jon stood between these swirling forces, silent, as if he carried the weight of every ghost from the past. He repeated that he had sworn his vow to the Night's Watch and thus had no intention of claiming a throne. But the realm demanded a rightful king, and the blood of Aegon the Conqueror ran through his veins. If the Great Council so decided, and if his vow could be, Jon hesitated, could be dissolved by some higher authority, then perhaps he would not refuse. His words were halting, uncertain. The vow was sacred, but so too was the duty of a Targaryen to defend the realm from what lay beyond the wall. Cersei tried to laugh it off, mocking the boy as a puppet of Ned Stark. But many were listening more closely now, especially those tired of Lannister ambition. A Targaryen might unite the realm, might quell the Baratheon schism between Stannis and Renly. And Ned Stark, a symbol of honesty and honor, stood beside this Targaryen boy. That alliance of wolf and dragon radiated a certain power. A hush spread again, leaving every lord to weigh this new possibility. Then came a challenge from the Westerland's side. One of Tywin's bannermen demanded that if this Jon Targaryen was real, if he was truly the son of Rhaegar, then where was his proof? Blood could be tested, perhaps with certain rites. Or perhaps the boy could prove it through some Targaryen trait. Jon had always had Stark features: dark hair, gray eyes, a solemn cast to his face that looked more Stark than Targaryen. Skepticism reigned. Jon's face flushed. He spoke softly, uncertain how to answer. Ned looked to him with pity, knowing how unprepared he was for this. Then, quietly, Samwell Tarly stepped forward, surprising everyone, including Jon. The round-faced young man, sweat beading on his brow, clutched a packet of parchment. He stammered that he had been researching old records for the Night's Watch. He had come across fragments referencing the Tower of Joy, including a notation of a marriage between Rhaegar Targaryen and a lady of House Stark, sealed by the authority of the High Septon of that era. The records, Sam stammered, had been half-burned in the sack of King's Landing, but references existed in the archives at the Night Fort and Castle Black. Some scribes had copied them generations ago. Sam produced these half-faded pages, unsure if they would suffice as proof. The High Septon, the lords near him, and even some of the maesters in attendance examined the documents. While incomplete, they seemed genuine, referencing a secret wedding performed in Dorne. It did not openly name Lyanna Stark, but the details, dates, and cryptic mentions of the Wolf Maid made it plain. The mood in the dragon pit shifted from chaotic scorn to uneasy wonder. Many recognized that these half-burned records, combined with Ned Stark's sworn testimony, Ser Barristan's reluctant confirmation of Targaryen physical traits, and Oberyn Martell's mention of a possible annulment, all painted a picture of a hidden but legitimate marriage. Cersei's fury was palpable. She hissed that the entire notion was an insult to Robert's memory. Yet that only reminded everyone that Robert's true heirs would be Stannis or Renly if the children before them were proven false. And if the Baratheon brothers could not unify the realm, a Targaryen might. The Great Council had been called precisely to avoid endless bloodshed, and here, seemingly, was a path. A precarious one, but still a path. In the midst of the clamor, Ned asked if any man there could stand and swear that Joffrey, Tommen, or Myrcella was truly Robert's child. Silence answered him, for none dared to commit perjury before so many witnesses. Ned asked if any man among them could swear that the realm would remain at peace if Stannis or Renly took the crown by force. The The Stormland lords shouted that they would follow Renly, but others were not convinced. Some insisted that Stannis was the rightful king, though he was absent. Ned's voice cut through the din, asking if any man there had not had enough of war, enough of rebellion and butchered children. The memory of Elaya's children, along with the Targaryen babes, hung over them like a specter. Catelyn Stark, rising, added her voice. She declared that she had once harbored resentment toward Jon Snow, believing him to be Ned's bastard. But she had come to see that if he was truly the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, if the gods had placed him in their care, then perhaps that was a sign that the realm needed uniting, not further division. Her statement stirred many hearts. Robb looked at her with gratitude, and Jon lowered his gaze, overwhelmed by her acceptance. Renly tried once more to press his claim. He declared himself the best candidate to rule, beloved of the people, a Baratheon in name and deeds. But the great Jon of the North boomed that the realm had seen enough usurpers. If the old line was restored in a peaceful manner, he preferred that. Some from the Vale, uncertain, whispered that perhaps they would support a Targaryen if it meant stability. The Tullus, mindful of their daughter's loyalty to Ned, declared neutrality for the moment, but some of them eyed Jon with new interest. The Martells, though they had once hated the Targaryens for Rhaegar's abandonment of Elia, now saw an opportunity to punish the Lannisters and possibly forge a new alliance. Dorne had suffered for years under the Lannisters' overshadowing power. If Oberyn could make peace with Lyanna's memory overshadowing Elaya's tragedy, they might support Jon for the sake of punishing those who had truly wronged them. All of this came to a head when Ned proposed that they allow the council itself to vote, an unprecedented measure in some ways, but not entirely. Historically, great councils had determined lines of succession before, though rarely had there been such deep divisions. Each major lord would cast his vote, and the crown's vassals would follow. The choice, Ned said, was between acknowledging Stannis as Robert's elder brother, Renly as the more popular younger brother, or turning to the Targaryen Stark heir who stood before them. He also reminded them that across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen lived still, rumored to have hatched dragons. If the realm rejected Jon, might Daenerys return with fire and blood? Lord Mace Tyrell bellowed that they already had a Targaryen in front of them. Why give that power to some foreign girl who had allied with barbarians, if rumor was to be believed? A ripple of agreement followed, for few had love for the Dothraki. Others murmured that Daenerys had a stronger claim than a mere child of Rhaegar's second marriage, but that was overshadowed by the fear of foreign invasion. Meanwhile, the lords of the Westerlands, uneasy about Tywin's absence, wavered between supporting Joffrey or seeking compromise. Many realized a swift war would devastate their lands if the North and Riverlands united with the Stormlands or the Reach. Profit lay in a peaceful compromise if one existed. So, they prepared to vote. One by one, major houses stood to declare their preference. The North announced they were for Jon, as Ned Stark asked them to trust him. The Riverlands wavered, but at Catelyn's urging, they too leaned toward Jon. He was a Targaryen, yes, but also kin to the Starks. The Vale, under Lysa Arryn, was reluctant. Lysa had her doubts, but some of her bannermen saw reason in preserving peace through a neutral choice. Dorne spoke through Oberyn Martell, who declared that Dorne would not suffer a Lannister on the throne and that they could not in good conscience support the Baratheons who had participated in the downfall of Elia Martell. So, while it was bitter, he cast Dorne's vote for Jon Targaryen on the condition that justice for Elia be served somehow. The Reach and the Stormlands were divided. Mace Tyrell's faction wanted to see which way the wind blew, while Renly had the love of many. But the notion of a Targaryen might serve their interests, especially if it kept the Lannisters in check. Cersei stood, face pale with rage, as each vote chipped away at her son's precarious claim. She threatened, cajoled, insisted that if they denied Joffrey, there would be war, that Tywin Lannister's armies would scorch the fields of those who betrayed the crown. But she could sense the tide turning. Even if House Lannister tried to fight, they would face multiple kingdoms allied behind Ned and his Targaryen ward. The best the Lannisters could hope for was negotiation, perhaps a compromise that secured safety for her children. So, with a final glare, she fell silent as the Great Council's momentum grew. It came down to Renly's attempt to sway enough houses to stand by him. But those who recognized the old Targaryen monarchy saw a chance to undo the scars of Robert's rebellion, to unify behind a. Ned Stark stood in the solar of the Red Keep with the weight of the realm pressing upon his broad shoulders. Robert Baratheon was dead, carried to the grave by a festering boar wound and far too many cups of sweet arbor reds. Outside the thick stone walls, the city of King's Landing seemed to swirl in chaos. The rumor of a new king on the Iron Throne batted about in every alley and market stall. Yet within these very walls, Ned knew the truth. Joffrey Baratheon was not Robert's son, and though Ned had uncovered the boy's parentage, the path he had taken diverged from rash arrests and forced confessions. Instead, he had chosen a steadier, if far more uncertain, path. He had sent ravens calling for a great council to be convened, a gathering of the great lords and ladies of Westeros akin to those storied councils of old, so they might settle the succession in full view of the realm. His mouth was dry. His heart thundered. The first stirrings of dawn lit the sky beyond the high windows, coloring the city rooftops in pinkish gold. More than one night's sleep had been lost in the days since Robert's death, for Ned had wrestled with more truths than he cared to bear. Jon's parentage was a secret he had nurtured in silence for years, one that even now threatened to rend his loyalty to house and realm in two. He remembered his dying sister's plea, the swirl of blood on her sheets at the Tower of Joy, her voice fading like a wind across the lonely mountains. "Promise me, Ned. Promise me." It was a promise he had kept with unflinching devotion to his own honor's cost. Yet honor demanded something else now. The realm teetered on the brink of a storm. Joffrey Baratheon, child of Jaime and Cersei Lannister, was no rightful heir. Stannis, so grim and humorless, was the eldest surviving Baratheon and by traditional law the true successor to King Robert's crown. But beyond that, there lay a deeper truth in Jon Snow, Rhaegar Targaryen's son and the last living link to the Dragon Kings who had ruled Westeros for nearly 3 centuries. That he also carried Lyanna Stark's blood made matters yet more complex. If Ned remained silent, if he allowed the realm to ignore the Baratheon line's rightful claims or the truth of Jon's parentage, war would surely consume them all. The Lannisters would fight for Joffrey, the Baratheons might fracture between Stannis and Renly, and once news spread of a Targaryen heir, 7 knew how many lords would rally or revolt. As for the Starks, they would stand alone or be forced to pick a side without the clarity a great council might bring. It was better to risk the chaos of an honest assembly than a hidden war, even if that assembly threatened to expose every secret he had so long kept in shadow. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Ned breathed in, drawing himself away from the dawn-streaked window. Ser Aerys Oakhart, clad in the white cloak of the Kingsguard, stepped inside. He bowed respectfully to the Lord of Winterfell, still acknowledged as the king's hand until the council convened, for Joffrey had not yet been officially crowned. "My lord," Ser Aerys said, "the lords Tyrell and Redwyne have arrived at the city gates. They are requesting audience before the great lords convene." Already, Ned rubbed at the bridge of his nose. He had expected delegations to arrive in the capital, but the Tyrells and Redwynes had made swifter progress than anticipated. "Very well. Arrange accommodations for them in the Tower of the Hand if you must, but for now, keep them close. We want no illusions that the council's purpose is anything but just. They are lords of high renown, but we cannot have them parading about the city with swords drawn." Ser Aerys inclined his head. "They come with a retinue, but they appear peaceful enough. Shall I have them escorted to you?" "No," Ned replied, careful. "I will greet them personally in the throne room, once the other lords have arrived. Until then, let them rest from their journey. They've come a long way from the Reach." When Ser Aerys departed, leaving the heavy oaken door to thud quietly behind him, Ned let out a ragged breath. Already lords were arriving, and soon enough the city would fill with every powerful house that could muster an envoy. The Vale, Riverlands, the North, Dorne, the Westerlands, though he doubted Tywin Lannister himself would walk easily into a council not on his terms. And then, of course, there was the matter of Stannis Baratheon on Dragonstone. Ned's messages had been sent by swiftest raven, but he knew not whether the Lord of Dragonstone would heed the call. Perhaps the greater question, the heaviest upon Ned's conscience, was whether his own family would arrive intact. He prayed to the old gods that Robb would come south, surrounded by loyal bannermen but not so many as to spark fear of a northern invasion. He prayed also that Jon would arrive safely from the Wall, if indeed Ned's urgent summons had found him. That letter had been the hardest to write, so full of unspoken truths that Ned's own hand had shaken around the quill. He had said only that there were matters of the utmost importance to House Stark, that he needed Jon to come to King's Landing at once, if the Lord Commander would grant him leave. No mention was made of Targaryens or the secret that had weighed upon Ned's heart for more than a decade. He could only hope the boy came. even if it meant the greatest upheaval Westeros had seen since the days of the Mad King. Ned shook off his reverie, calling for his guard and making his way through the twisting corridors of the Red Keep. On the way, he glimpsed the scurrying of dozens of servants and gold-cloaked city watch. All of King's Landing was in turmoil, some corners rife with rumor, others locked in bitter quiet. The Lannisters still held much power here, and Cersei had not been idle since Robert's death. Her father, Tywin Lannister, was rumored to be marching with a host from the Westerlands, though whether that was to intimidate the council or ensure Joffrey's coronation was still unknown. The steps down toward the massive inner yard were cold underfoot. In the yard itself, Ned found it half filled with arrivals. Lesser lords from the Crownlands, petty knights, merchants, and functionaries of the court who were anxiously awaiting directions. He forced himself to nod politely, though he ached with the knowledge that each one was here to see whether the Iron Throne would pass to a Baratheon or Seven help them, a Targaryen, or perhaps remain precariously under the Lannisters' hold if cunning words outmaneuvered truth. He thought of Sansa and Arya. Both were safe for the moment, under heavy Stark guard in Maegor's holdfast. He had told them to remain inside for their own protection. Sansa had wept at the news of King Robert's death, anxious that the betrothal to Joffrey might now vanish in scandal, or worse, that war might break out. Arya had simply gone sullen, hugging Needle to her chest whenever Ned saw her. He had tried to reassure them that a great council was the honorable way to proceed, but even to his own ears, his words sounded like the hollow recitation of a prayer. The day wore on. Word swept through the city that a large retinue was entering the King's Gate. Ned took his seat in the throne room, flanked by loyal men of the north and the gold cloaks that remained answerable to the hand of the king. The Iron Throne, that harsh, spiked seat of melted swords, loomed above him empty, for none sat it until the question of kingship was decided. The Targaryens had forged it in the fires of Balerion. That memory seeped through the centuries to prickle the air. Cersei Lannister glided in, accompanied by her brother Tyrion and a small knot of Lannister guards. She wore a dress of deep crimson with golden lion embroidery that clung to her like a second skin. Her expression was of cool, aloof confidence, though Ned caught the tension flickering behind her emerald eyes. "You have called a great council," she said without greeting. "A brazen move for a mere hand of the king. The realm has known its rightful ruler since Robert drew his last breath. My son." Her voice cracked like a whip in the near-empty hall. Echoes danced along the pillars. Ned measured his words. "I have called the lords of the realm to meet, my lady, so that we might dispel all confusion and forestall bloodshed. The question of succession is too fraught for any single man or woman to settle. This is an ancient remedy, rarely invoked, but it has precedence. Surely you would not object to letting the realm speak openly to prove your son's claim beyond doubt." He could sense her fury as she lifted her chin. "This can only end in strife. You embarrass me by questioning my son's right. I question what I must for the good of the realm. Your father may also speak if he chooses to appear. I have invited him as I have invited all great lords of Westeros." Her lips parted to snap a reply, but Tyrion Lannister placed a small hand on her arm. "Let us not forget, dear sister, that when men gather for councils, it is not always reason that prevails. We should remain vigilant, but perhaps it is best to show some courtesy here." His mismatched eyes traveled up to Ned. "Lord Stark, I only hope the King's City can support such a gathering without turning into a tinderbox." Ned gave him a measured nod. "We do what we must." Cersei pressed her lips into a thin line. With that, she glided away, red gown trailing across the marble floor, her retinue following like a line of sullen cats. Tyrion lingered for a moment, studying Ned with curiosity, before he, too, turned on his heel. The echo of boots faded into the distance. Outside the throne room, the day continued in tension. More lords arrived, some with small armies, others with only a few guards. The Tyrells came in full splendor, Mace Tyrell, florid and smiling, accompanied by his formidable mother, Lady Olenna, and a shining retinue of knights in green and gold. Renly Baratheon, who had departed the city shortly after Robert's death, rode back in with a lesser escort than he had before, but rumor said he had been gathering support in the Reach. Lords Rosby and Stokeworth arrived from near the Crownlands. Lord Yohn Royce, battered from a hurried journey south, carried with him the grudging blessing of Lady Lisa Arryn in the Vale. Balon Greyjoy sent no one, unsurprising, but a few minor Iron-born lords straggled behind the greater delegations, likely more interested in gleaning news than giving it. Yet the presence that loomed largest in Ned's mind was not yet visible, the north. His own son Robb, still so young, but now forced to come south in the name of House Stark. Would he arrive in time? Would the city's rumors and dangers snare him? And what of Jon from the distant wall? Dusk turned to night. Ned retired to his chambers, exhausted by the day's formalities, but found no reprieve there. Maester Pycelle had delivered more messages, some from across the realm, others from the Tullis of Riverrun, noting their progress. He read them all until his eyes ached and at last let his head sink onto folded arms. He dreamed of blood and falling snow, of towers crumbling and a baby wailing in the darkness. He saw Robert in the black of morning, a hammered warhammer in his fist, leading a charge against Targaryen banners. Then the dream shifted and Ned found himself in the crypts of Winterfell, the old kings of winter gazing down at him as they whispered. He could not grasp the words. Somewhere he thought he heard Lyanna's voice. "Promise me, Ned." Morning's sun woke him. He rose, dressed, and prepared for another grueling day of receiving lords and negotiating the precarious peace. But that day held a glimmer of comfort. Word reached him that a large column of Northmen approached the city's gates, bearing the direwolf banner of House Stark. Not only that, but the gate guards also reported a small party of black-cloaked riders had accompanied them. Jon had come. The thought nearly buckled Ned's knees with relief. He made for the courtyard, wind stirring his cloak, the air heavy with that mix of heat and dust that characterized King's Landing in early autumn. Stagnant scents from the city's waste floated on the breeze, but Ned hardly noticed. His eyes were fixed on the open gate. There, Robb Stark rode forward, and at his side, on a dark horse, was Jon Snow, clad no longer in furs, but in the black of the Night's Watch. Robb swung down first, handing his reins to a retainer. He had grown since Ned had last seen him. There was a confidence to the set of his jaw, though his face still bore the traces of youth. Behind him, tall Great Jon Umber and quiet Roose Bolton dismounted, along with a swath of other northern lords. Men parted to let Jon approach, who remained astride for a moment longer, his expression unreadable beneath the unruly dark curls of his hair. Then he too slid down from the saddle. He looked older, harder, no doubt the rigors of the wall had left their mark. Ned strode forward, placing a hand on each young man's shoulder. "Robb," he said, relief and warmth in his voice. "You have come safely." Robb nodded, bowing his head briefly in respect. "Father, I rode as quickly as I could. Our bannermen insisted on following, but I kept the numbers as low as was prudent so as not to alarm the crown. Still, we are here to heed your summons." He stepped aside, gesturing to the northern lords. They too wished to see justice done. Jon's presence drew Ned's eyes. He opened his mouth, uncertain what to say, for how did one greet a secret Targaryen after all these years of calling him bastard? "I am glad you have come, Jon," was all he managed, though he tried to pour a lifetime of unspoken apology and pride into the words. "Your being here matters more than you know." Jon's dark eyes flickered with caution. "I came because your raven spoke of dire need. The Lord Commander gave me leave to come. If it was anyone but you asking, I doubt it would have been allowed." Ned's throat tightened. "I will explain everything. For now, you must have rest, and your men as well. But understand this. The council I have called may decide the fate of the 7 kingdoms and your place in it." Jon exchanged a curious glance with Robb, but said nothing. The swirl of questions was plain in his eyes. The northern bannermen followed Ned's men to the quarters assigned for them. Word of their arrival soon filtered through the Red Keep, prompting scattered speculation. The presence of so many Northmen with the scions of House Stark at their head raised alarm among some of the southern lords. Ned did what he could to allay fears, ensuring that the Northmen were lodged comfortably and with minimal friction. The gold cloaks under Janos Slint watched them warily, but so long as no blades were drawn, no trouble would arise, at least not yet. That evening, Ned found time at last to bring Robb and Jon to the same private solar where, days before, he had wrestled alone with the realm's precarious future. A single candle burned on the table, its flame dancing shadows across the walls. He insisted on only a couple of guards at the door, giving them strict instructions that they were not to be disturbed. Jon stood by the narrow window looking out over the city lights. Robb paced by the table, occasionally setting a hand on the pommel of his sword as if to ground himself. Ned regarded them both, pride and sorrow twisting inside him. How young they still were, yet how heavy their burdens had become. "I know you wonder why I called you," Ned began quietly. "Both of you. Robb, you are my heir as Lord of Winterfell, though I remain living 7 willing. Jon, you have pledged yourself to the Night's Watch." He paused, exhaling. Yet events have forced my hand. I fear we stand on the cusp of a great civil war over the Iron Throne. Robert Baratheon is dead. There are claims and there are secrets. Robb exchanged a look with Jon, then spoke. Secrets about Joffrey's parentage, I've heard. Men are whispering that the boy is not Robert's trueborn son. But what does that have to do with calling a great council, father? Could we not simply support Stannis as the rightful heir by the laws of the Baratheons? Ned hesitated. Should he say it outright? He glanced at Jon, who had turned from the window, face cast half in shadow. Stannis is indeed the lawful heir if we follow the line of House Baratheon. Renly is also pressing a claim. But there is another. An older claim, in a way. Silence gripped the room. Jon's brow furrowed. The Targaryens are all gone, save Daenerys across the narrow sea. Or so the world believes. Why? Ned cleared his throat, and the sound was too loud in the hush. He steeled himself, forcing his gaze to meet Jon's. Many years ago, my sister Lyanna was pledged to Robert Baratheon, but she loved another. Rhaegar Targaryen. They wed in secret. And Lyanna bore a child. Before she died, she gave him to me to keep safe, to raise as my own bastard. She made me swear on her deathbed that I would protect him from Robert's wrath, from the realm's thirst for Targaryen blood. That child was you, Jon. Time hung in the air, unmoving. Robb stared in shock, confusion warring in his eyes. Jon paled as if struck. He took a step backward, as though the ground beneath him trembled. This cannot be, Jon managed, voice low. You always said I was your blood, but never. You are my blood, Ned said quietly. Your mother was my sister. You are the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. My vow kept you safe from those who would have killed any Targaryen child after the sack of King's Landing. I told no one, not even Catelyn, for fear word would spread. If Robert had known the truth, he was a good friend, but his hatred of the Targaryens ran deeper than any bond we shared. Robb sank into a chair. But that means Jon has a claim to the Iron Throne? By the line of the Targaryens. Ned nodded, though he felt the weight of the gesture. A stronger claim than Joffrey's, perhaps even stronger than Stannis's, by the logic of those who once acknowledged Targaryen rule. But the realm is not so simple. Many lords despise the memory of the Mad King and might not take well to a Targaryen on the throne. Others might see it as the rightful restoration. There will be strife no matter what. The Great Council is meant to give the realm a chance to choose peacefully, whether that is Stannis or a Targaryen heir returned or some other settlement. If we do not allow them to gather and decide, the realm will tear itself apart. Jon's breathing was unsteady. And you want me to present myself as this Targaryen heir? I am a brother of the Night's Watch. I swore vows. I cannot take lands or titles. That is another matter, Ned said heavily. Those vows, the Night's Watch is an oath that supersedes all claims, I know. Yet the realm is in crisis. We cannot pretend your parentage does not exist. We also cannot claim that the Watch has no stake in the stability of the realm. Not when winter is coming. Not when you've told me in your letters of the dangers stirring beyond the wall. The flicker of confusion in Jon's eyes sharpened. Even if I stood aside, if I refused a crown, others might use my name. I see that now. Ned agreed. There will be men who rally to you or wish to manipulate you. And if the realm learns of your parentage before you speak it yourself, you might find an army thrust upon you, or a knife in your back. The only defense is to come forward openly, under my protection, and let the Great Council hear the truth. Robb blew out a breath, raking a hand through auburn curls. 7 save us. This will upend everything. Stannis will not yield easily, and the Lannisters, they will brand it treason. I can already see swords drawn in every corner of the realm. Ned gazed at them both, regret mingled with paternal pride. I have asked you here because you are my sons. Both of you in blood or in heart. And if you can stand together, the North may hold strong. A united front might sway enough of the lords to accept whatever settlement the Great Council proposes. Whether that means the realm chooses Jon as king, or Stannis, or some shared arrangement, I do not know. But I pray it spares us a war. Jon let out a strangled laugh, though there was no mirth in it. A father I've loved all my life just told me my father was someone else entirely. And now you speak of me as a potential king. I don't know what to think. Think on this, Ned said gently. You are not alone. You have Robb, you have me, whatever you decide, we will stand beside you. But the realm must hear the truth. I will not see good men die because we kept silent. They spoke long into the night, with Ned recounting the last days of Robert's rebellion as best he could without unraveling from grief. Robb mostly listened, though he asked pointed questions about the political ramifications, clearly preparing himself for the storm to come. Jon's face remained grave, but behind his eyes burned 1,000 questions about his mother, his father, the life he might have lived. Ned tried to answer, but so much was lost or overshadowed by sorrowful memory. Eventually, they parted to find what rest they could. Ned was proud of Robb's resolve and worried for Jon's turmoil. He himself felt no peace, only a cold dread for the days that lay ahead. The next morning, the hall of the Red Keep bustled like a disturbed anthill. The Great Council was to begin the following day in the Dragon Pit, an echo of the councils of old, though some argued that it should be held within the keep itself. Ned insisted on the Dragonette as it was large enough to accommodate many lords and their retinues without crowding them into a single hall. Let them gather under the shattered dome of the Targaryens' old seat for dragons, with the broken roofs and charred walls reminding them all of what war could bring. Or perhaps reminding them of Targaryen might, though Ned tried not to dwell on that possibility. Messages flew between delegations, brittle politeness hiding steel. The Tyrells offered to host feasts, but Mace Tyrell's honeyed words rang hollow. The Lannisters bristled at every mention of Joffrey's legitimacy. Lords from the Crownlands, the Stormlands, the Riverlands, and the Vale twisted and turned in political maneuverings, seeking alliances that might put them on the winning side. Some houses from the Westerlands and the North threatened to come to blows in the streets until Ned had the City Watch intervene. The tension was a living thing, thrumming in the air. Amid this maelstrom, Ned kept Robb and Jon close, advising them as best he could. He saw how Jon's presence drew sidelong glances. The black attire of the Night's Watch was rare in King's Landing, and rarer still in a gathering such as this. Some whispered that Eddard Stark had an illegitimate son who now served at the Wall. Others noted how closely the young man's dark hair resembled that of someone. The rumor mill ground ceaselessly, but no one had the full truth yet. Not until Ned spoke it. The day of the Great Council's opening dawned beneath a hazy sky. 1,000 or more men and women crowded around the Dragon Pit. Not only the highborn lords and ladies, but also lesser knights, squires, and curious commoners who had gathered at a distance. Lines of gold-cloaked guards ringed the ancient structure, their watchful eyes turned outward. Within, the broken arches and cracked stone pillars rose like jagged teeth, the sunlight streaming in through gaping holes in the dome above. A raised wooden platform had been erected near the center of the pit, where a few seats stood for the greatest lords, as well as a lectern from which official statements could be made. Ned, flanked by Robb and Jon, stepped onto the platform to find the eyes of half the realm upon them. The murmur was deafening, a roar of shifting feet, rustling cloaks, and hushed conversation. Cersei Lannister and her son Joffrey stood with the Kingsguard at one edge of the platform. The boy's face was pinched and pale, but his eyes flashed with arrogance. Tyrion lingered nearby, watchful. Little fingers slipped among the crowd, giving Ned a mocking little bow when their gazes met. Varys was there, too, his hands folded in voluminous sleeves, smiling a smile that might have been genuine or false. It was always impossible to tell. At the other side, Renly Baratheon, resplendent in green and gold, spoke quietly with Margaery Tyrell and her brother Loras. Across the pit stood Stannis Baratheon, his jaw clenched as if carved from iron. He had arrived the previous evening without fanfare, escorted by a small contingent from Dragonstone. His presence was a cold flame in the council, for all knew how rigidly he viewed matters of law and succession. Around them, lesser lords of Dorne, the Riverlands, the Reach, and other regions found their places. Some had brought banners, though Ned had decreed that no man might bring a personal retinue of more than 20 armed guards. Tension thrummed in the dusty air. The moment approached. A herald banged a staff upon the wooden platform. Here now begins the Great Council of the Seven Kingdoms, convened by Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, hand of the late King Robert Baratheon, in the name of peace and stability. Ned stepped forward, shoulders squared. He felt the gazes drilling into him from all corners. Cersei's venomous glare, Stannis' stoic gaze, Renly's bright curiosity, and the swirl of uncertain stares from the rest. "Lords and ladies of Westeros," Ned began, projecting his voice as best he could. "We gather here, not in joy, but in mourning. Our king, Robert Baratheon, has fallen. The question of succession now weighs upon us all." He paused, allowing a ripple of unrest to pass through the crowd. It is known to many that Lord Stannis Baratheon is Robert's eldest living brother, and that by the laws of inheritance, he stands as next in line. It is also known that Lord Renly Baratheon has put forth a claim, citing certain discontent with Lord Stannis' nature and approach to rule. A boy sits in the Red Keep, Joffrey Baratheon, who some say is the trueborn son of Robert. Yet rumors cast doubt on his parentage. At that, Cersei's face twisted, and she murmured something to Joffrey, who reddened and spat in Ned's direction. Ned ignored it and continued. "We have come to decide, without bloodshed, who shall wear the crown. Let the High Lords speak their minds, and let the truth be heard." Stannis cleared his throat, stepping forward. He was not a man given to speeches, but he forced himself. "I am Stannis of the House Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, older brother to the late king. By all the laws of gods and men, the crown is mine. I do not require the blessing of this council, but I intend to show I do not fear scrutiny. I have always done my duty, and I will do it still." Renly scoffed quietly, earning him a withering look from Stannis. Then Renly himself spoke, arms spread. "My lords, I love my brother dearly, but his claim does not guarantee the realm's happiness. A king must be beloved, or at least accepted, lest the throne stand upon a foundation of swords alone. I have many in the Reach and the Stormlands who would prefer a younger, more genial hand upon the helm." Cersei seized her moment next, her voice like a blade. "Joffrey is the son of King Robert. The rest is baseless slander. He is the rightful heir by blood, recognized from the day of his birth. Any who speak otherwise aim to tear apart the Seven Kingdoms in civil war." She turned to Ned with a look of pure venom, then to Stannis with almost equal disdain. The throng rippled with tension, like a stirred wasp's nest. Ned let the mutterings die down. Then he gestured for silence. "There is yet another matter to set before this council. There exists another claim, by a blood older than House Baratheon, though it has been hidden." He glanced at Jon, who stood behind him. The boy was stiff, face pale, but he stepped forward nonetheless. "This is Jon Snow," Ned said, his voice carrying across the ruinous arches of the Dragon Pit. "Known to the realm as my bastard. In truth, he is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, lawfully wed in secret. I have kept him hidden all these years on my sister's dying wish to protect him from those who would have taken his life simply for his name. Now the time has come for truth. The realm must decide if it will accept or refute his claim." A great clamor erupted, startled exclamations and shouts echoing through the pit. The name Targaryen carried weight like no other. Some lords recoiled in alarm, others looked intrigued, while a few gazed suspiciously at Ned. Cersei's eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed in hateful fury. Stannis looked as though his face had turned to stone, while Renly's eyes flicked with a confusion that flirted with possibility. The Tyrells whispered among themselves, Lady Olenna fixing Jon with a penetrating stare as though he were some novel curiosity. Jon lifted his chin, though it trembled slightly. "I am a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. I make no claim to any throne. I serve the realm, but the truth cannot be hidden any longer. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen, my mother was Lyanna Stark. Lord Stark, who raised me, speaks truly." Shouts echoed. Some demanded proof, others flung accusations. Another Targaryen pretender, came a voice from the crowd. "We thought we were done with that plague." Ned's voice cut through. "I know the proof many will demand. There are witnesses who can attest to the secret marriage, rare though they may be. Howland Reed still lives, who was with me at the Tower of Joy, and there were Septons who performed the ceremony for Rhaegar and Lyanna, one of whom we believe survived. We have letters, too, though they are old and uncertain. But I would remind you all, the realms needs stand above any man's desire for bloodshed. This council must weigh the truth, not simply lash out in fear." "Truth?" Cersei's voice trembled with anger. If there is any truth to this nonsense, she bared her teeth. If your so-called Targaryen boy had any rightful claim, Robert would have put him to the sword. You tarnish my son's name for a ghost of a house. It is treason. Treason to speak this in public. Stannis's voice rumbled, low and cold. If the boy is a Targaryen, that only means he is a pretender. The Baratheons broke the yoke of Targaryen tyranny once already. We need not bend the knee to it again. Cersei's lips curled. For once, Stannis, we agree on something. Renly's gaze flicked between them, calculating. Yet if there is a legitimate Targaryen heir, might not some of the lords consider it a rightful restoration? The Tyrells in particular remember the old alliances. The Dornish, too, once had Rhaegar's wife among them, did they not? A voice from Dorne called out, "You'll not speak of Prince Rhaegar's marriage to Elia Martell so lightly. Where does that leave us?" "He was already wed before your sister came into the picture, Stark. This is madness." Tension spiked anew. Ned raised a hand, trying to restore order. "It is a twisted lineage. Rhaegar's marriage to Elia Martell was still in place when he wed Lyanna in secret unless, as some rumors have it, there was an annulment. The truth of that is uncertain. But it does not change that Jon was born of Targaryen blood. The realm must decide how heavily that blood weighs against the Baratheon claim. No one man can settle this alone. That is why we called this council." Robb stepped to Ned's side, swallowing hard but standing resolutely. Winterfell stands behind Lord Stark in seeing that the truth be heard. If Jon is truly my aunt's son, then he is of House Stark as well as House Targaryen. He is not your enemy unless you force him to be. We do not seek war. Murmurs spread, fueling a torrent of heated debate. Across the pit, Tyrion Lannister raised a hand for attention, speaking in that sharp, measured tone of his. "My lords, let us not forget that we stand on the brink of catastrophe. We have a war waiting to happen if we cannot resolve the succession. As interesting as this new Targaryen claim is, the question remains, will the realm unite behind a single king, or shall we see the Seven Kingdoms tear themselves apart in a spasm of violence?" Mace Tyrell, blustering, tried to seize attention. "The Reach has many swords and we will not be trifled with. We will stand behind the rightful king, but we must first be certain who that is. This talk of Targaryens returning, it stirs up old loyalties and old fears." A slender figure, cloaked in Martell orange, stepped forward, Prince Doran Martell's envoy, his son Quentyn, or perhaps a cousin. "And what of Dorne? We have not forgotten the horrors inflicted upon our princess, Elia Martell, and her children by the Lannisters during the sack of King's Landing. If the Targaryen line has some rightful heir, we might consider lenience if justice is promised. But that is only if the boy's parentage is indeed proven. We will not be swayed by hearsay." The entire assembly clamored with demands, arguments, threats, and entreaties. Ned prayed to the old gods that this would not devolve into open bloodshed. He again raised his voice. "Let the realm speak. We will consider the Baratheon claim, the Targaryen claim, and yes, any other claims that might exist. We will hear witnesses, examine letters. And we shall do it here, in the eyes of the realm, not with knives in the dark." So the great council commenced in earnest. Over the following days, the lords and ladies of the Seven Kingdoms assembled repeatedly in the Dragon Pit for heated sessions. They scrutinized the inheritance laws, argued over precedents, threatened and cajoled. Proving Joffrey's illegitimacy became a central theme. Men whispered of the boy's golden hair, so at odds with Robert's black locks. Ned presented the evidence from the royal lineages, pointedly referencing details from the late Jon Arryn's and Stannis' own investigations. Cersei raged at each mention, but more and more lords began to doubt Joffrey's claim. Still, the Lannisters had formidable power, and the threat of Tywin's host weighed heavily on any who might provoke Cersei's wrath. At the same time, the Targaryen question was equally volatile. Some were horrified at the thought of returning a Targaryen to the throne after the atrocities of the Mad King. Others, especially some houses of the Reach and Crownlands, remembered the stability under prior Targaryen rule and might be swayed if Jon's parentage was established. Dorne was torn. They had lost Elia Martell and her children, who were also Targaryens of a kind, yet the Lannisters had been involved in that horror. If House Targaryen rose again, might Dorne see vengeance for Elia? Yet many Dornishmen recalled how Elia had been set aside or overshadowed in Rhaegar's life for the sake of Lyanna Stark. The wound was deep. Meanwhile, the Baratheons were not united among themselves. Renly's youthful charisma drew some lords who found Stannis' severity unappealing. Stannis stood his ground, claiming that law was law whether or not the realm liked him. The tension rose until it seemed swords would be drawn at any moment. Jon attended these sessions, usually silent. Ned saw how each argument or jibe at the Targaryen name weighed upon him. He was no orator, nor did he relish the attention. Yet in private, Ned assured him that his honesty, his calm presence, might speak more eloquently than any argument. Jon stated repeatedly that he would not claim the throne if the realm did not wish it, but also that he would not see the realm torn apart on his account. That stance intrigued some lords. Here was a potential king who did not hunger for power. It frightened others who suspected false modesty or cunning. Amid the swirl of the city, ravens flew in and out with communications to various lords who had chosen not to attend or who awaited word of the proceedings. Tywin Lannister loomed over the horizon, rumored to be marching ever closer, though he had not made direct aggression. The Gold Cloaks, commanded now by Ser Barristan and Selmy in the place of Janos Slynt, for Ned had quietly removed Slynt from the equation, knowing the man's corruption, strove to keep the peace. The City Watch, hammered into shape by Barristan's honor, did what it could to prevent bloodshed. On the 8th day of the council, tensions reached a crescendo. Under the broken dome of the Dragonbit, men rose to speak for or against the Targaryen claim, for or against the Baratheons, referencing lines of succession going back to Aegon the Conqueror himself. Cersei stood near Joffrey, her jaw clenched like a vice as lord after lord began to question the boy's paternity more openly than ever before. Stannis and Renly glowered at each other across the pit, each condemning the other's pretensions. The Dornish envoy demanded clarity on Rhaegar's annulment rumor, which no one could firmly prove or disprove. But Ned attempted to produce the old testimonies of septons and knights who had stood with Rhaegar. Some had died, but a few were rumored to survive in Essos or remote corners of Westeros. Finally, after another barrage of angry voices, Ned rose. He had never been a man who loved the sound of his own voice, but the realm teetered on a knife's edge. "My lords, let us not forget why we are here," he called. "We must not allow the realm to be dragged into a war of pretenders and half-truths. Let those who seek the throne press their claims openly. Let us weigh them. If we cannot find a single name that the majority of us can accept, then the realm itself will decide." There is precedent in the Great Council of 101 AC, when the lords gathered to choose Viserys I over Rhaenys, though she had a strong claim. In that instance, the lords of the realm determined the line of succession. I propose we do likewise, to spare us all from bloodshed. He glanced at Cersei, who looked ready to spit nails, then at Stannis, who stood rigid, and Renly, who kept shifting from foot to foot. Finally, Ned's gaze settled on Jon, who remained near the platform, half hidden in the swirl of black cloak. "There are 4 claims before us. Lord Stannis Baratheon, by the laws of inheritance. Lord Renly Baratheon, by the right of southern support. Prince Joffrey Baratheon, if he is indeed Robert's son and not fathered by Jaime Lannister. And Jon Snow, whose name is Targaryen if my words hold weight." The crowd stirred at Ned's giving Jon the courtesy title of prince, but he had done so deliberately, to drive home the truth of his parentage. "I open the floor," Ned said, "to any who would speak to these claims." A hush settled momentarily, if only because no one wanted to yield the advantage to another by speaking first. Then Mace Tyrell, brazen as ever, puffed out his chest. "The Reach finds this Targaryen boy's claim interesting. We have long memories of the stability the Targaryens once provided, though we do not forget the Mad King's cruelties. However, we also believe the line of succession cannot simply be brushed aside. Lord Stannis has a strong claim in law, but lacks the warmth that might bind the realm. Lord Renly is well loved, but if we are to be governed by law, how can we set that aside?" He paused, as if uncertain how to navigate the minefield of possibility. "We propose that perhaps a compromise might be reached," he finally said, turning an expectant gaze toward Ned. "If the Targaryen boy has a rightful claim, but lacks acceptance, could a marriage be arranged to tie that line with the Baratheons or some other great house, thus forging a new line? Or if Stannis does not want to yield the throne, might he take a Targaryen bride to unify the claims?" The idea sparked a wave of conversation, though Ned saw Jon stiffen. The notion that he would marry or be used as a political pawn for a throne he did not even desire was hardly likely to sit well. Stannis's face grew thunderous at the suggestion that he wed a Targaryen. Some old bitterness churned in his eyes, and he spat, "I am already wed to Lady Celis Florent. I have no intention of putting her aside. I am not my brother Rhaegar." A tense hush followed. Ned's insides churned, for it became increasingly clear that the realm was on the verge of fracturing. The Great Council had aired all the claims, but the question of resolution loomed. Unless a clear majority coalesced behind one candidate, civil war was inevitable. That night, Ned Solar played host to the largest private gathering yet. He had invited Stannis, Renly, Tyrion representing Joffrey's side, for Cersei refused to attend, and a handful of neutral but influential lords such as Doran Martell's envoy, the Tyrells, and the new Warden of the West in Tywin's absence. Some minor cousin who carried Lannister authority. Robb and Jon were there too. The Red Keep provided them a single round table beneath candlelit chandeliers reminiscent of the age when Aegon the Conqueror had first come to Westeros. The tension was suffocating. Ned began, "I have brought us together because the Great Council is on the cusp of failure. We have heard the claims, but a consensus eludes us. One day more of bickering and swords will be drawn. I propose we find a compromise here, in private, or the realm will drown in blood. Let each side speak plainly." Stannis bristled. "My claim is by law. Yet I see that many lords find me harsh. I will not compromise on the matter of my rights, nor will I set aside my marriage or coddle those who question the rightful line of succession." Renly offered a soft sneer. "Then you condemn the realm to war. People want a king who can unite them. You are iron that cannot bend, only break." Tyrion, politely sipping wine, inserted himself. "And what of Joffrey? Do you truly believe he shall simply stand aside while you name some other man king? The Lannisters do not yield easily. I dare say my father would burn half the continent before seeing our family cast down. Yet, perhaps we might be convinced to step aside if certain guarantees are made, for instance, the continued power of House Lannister, and a safe marriage alliance for Joffrey or Tommen or Myrcella. But only if the realm is certain Joffrey is not the rightful heir. If that matter is proven beyond doubt, well," he spread his hands. "We are pragmatic creatures, even if we roar like lions." The Dornish envoy, a spare man with keen eyes, stroked a trimmed beard. "Dorne remains unconvinced about this Targaryen boy. We hear the rumors of Rhaegar's secret marriage, but our beloved Princess Elia was scorned. The Martells' hearts still burn with that wound. Yet if we see justice for the crimes committed upon Elia and her children, perhaps we might be open to supporting a Targaryen restoration. Vengeance must be had, in some form or another." Mace Tyrell fidgeted, while Lady Olenna, sitting behind him, gave the room a pointed stare. "We Tyrells have no desire to unleash war. We might consider supporting a Targaryen boy if it suits the realm, or a Baratheon if that suits better. We simply wish to remain on the winning side. Rather, the side that saves the small folk from chaos." She gave a small smile. "My dear Marjorie is of marriageable age, you know." Into this swirling pot of ambitions, Jon finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "I am a brother of the Night's Watch. I have no desire to wear a crown or take a wife. If the realm will accept Stannis as king, so be it. If they want Renly, let them choose him. If they want to go on pretending that Joffrey is Robert's son, well, I cannot stop them. But the truth is out now. Use it how you will, but do not drag me onto a throne I never asked for." A hush, and Tyrion's eyebrows rose. "That is quite a statement. Truly? You have no intention of pressing your claim." Jon gave him a fierce look. "The wall is unguarded enough as it is. That's where I belong." Stannis snorted. "Fine words, but the damage is done. Your name alone might rally half the realm to your cause, if they so choose. War could begin with your supporters marching in your name, whether or not you lead them. That is why we must find a settlement," Ned interjected, ignoring how his throat constricted at the pain in Jon's eyes. "One in which no lord feels compelled to rise in rebellion on behalf of an unseated heir. Perhaps the best solution is for the Great Council to declare Stannis as king, as the rightful Baratheon successor, on the condition that certain concessions be made to ensure stability. The Lannisters might keep Casterly Rock, and Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella might maintain titles of rank but be barred from the throne by a royal decree. Dorne might gain justice through official condemnation of those responsible for Princess Elia's murder. And if it so pleases the realm, let them acknowledge Jon's lineage but name him legally bound to the Watch with no claim to lands or titles. That last concession burned Ned's heart, for it meant that Jon, his sister's son, would remain effectively disinherited, a vow-bound man to the Watch. Yet it might be the only way to keep the realm from tearing itself apart over the Targaryen name. If men believed Jon was resigned to the Black and would never press a claim, perhaps that would quell the impetus for war. Stannis's mouth was a grim line. I will not write a royal decree that Joffrey is nothing, a bastard, without a fight. But if it is the will of the council, if the evidence is plain, he stared Tyrion down. Then I might accept it for the sake of the realm, so long as I am recognized as the true king. Tyrion drummed his fingers on the table. That is a bold arrangement, Lord Stark. I cannot speak for my entire family, but I know my father will not be pleased. Still, if we want to avoid civil war, some sacrifice must be made. He exhaled, glancing at Renly. And what of your claim, dear Lord Renly? Renly shrugged, though the bitterness in his eyes showed. I have no wish to bow to a man who never wanted to be loved. But I also have no desire to tear the realm apart. If I am granted a high seat at court and the freedom to live as I choose, I might yield. Stannis gave a short nod, an act of forbearance that seemed to cost him. The conversation carried on deep into the night, forging the skeleton of a compromise. More steps would be needed, and the rest of the realm would have to consent or at least acquiesce. But as dawn neared, Ned felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps the Great Council would end not with the crowning of a Targaryen or the triumph of Joffrey, but with a reluctant acceptance of Stannis as king, tempered by the realm's desire for peace. The Lannisters forced to relent, and Jon acknowledged as a Targaryen in truth but forever sworn to the Night's Watch. It was not the solution Ned had imagined as a boy when honor was simple and kings were righteous. But it might be the solution that saved thousands of lives. The next day, the final session of the Great Council convened amid heightened guards and watchful eyes. The compromise was presented. The scribes recorded every clause, every vow. Cersei Lannister did not attend, but Tyrion stood in her place, a consummate negotiator. Stannis, iron-willed, demanded absolute fealty from all lords present if the council proclaimed him king. Renly, with a thin smile, threw his support behind the measure so long as certain titles and appointments were guaranteed. The Tyrells, Dornish, Riverlands, Vale, and Crownlands lords spoke in turn, each seeking some measure of reassurance or profit. At last, a vote was called, an archaic procedure recalling the Council of 101, where the assembled lords would declare their preference. The vast majority, swayed by the undeniable proof of Joffrey's illegitimacy and the fear of Lannister ambitions, as well as the anxiety over installing another Targaryen, chose Stannis. A minority withheld or abstained, uncertain or resentful. Some denied Jon, but he stood there with head bowed, repeating his vow that he would not press any claim nor allow himself to be used as a banner of rebellion. With each repetition, the impetus for a Targaryen restoration ebbed. Those who might have supported Jon recognized that he would not be their standard-bearer. By late afternoon, the matter was settled. The roars of agreement mingled with reluctant acquiescence. The scribes sealed the official decree of the Great Council. Stannis Baratheon, first of his name, was proclaimed king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Joffrey Baratheon was publicly declared a bastard of Jaime and Cersei Lannister, though granted the courtesy title Lord Joffrey Hill and a generous estate far from King's Landing, pending Tywin Lannister's acceptance. The Lannisters would remain in possession of Casterly Rock, with no further censure if they abided by the council's decisions. Renly was named Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, and Mace Tyrell was confirmed as Warden of the South. Dorne would receive formal reparations and the condemnation of Gregor Clegane and others complicit in Elia Martell's murder. And Jon Snow, born of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, was acknowledged in writing as Jon Targaryen if he so chose the name, but also recognized as a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, thereby removing him from the line of succession permanently, so long as he held those vows. The raucous session ended in a haze of heated conversation. The Watchers poured out of the dragon pit, abuzz with the news. Stannis Baratheon was king. Some rejoiced, some grumbled, but all recognized a war might have been averted, or at least postponed. Within the ruined shell of the dragon pit, Jon found Ned alone for a moment, amid the swirl of departing lords. "So that is it, then," Jon said quietly. "I'm acknowledged, but I remain with the Watch." Ned read the conflicting swirl of relief and sorrow in Jon's eyes. "You deserve a crown by birth," Ned answered softly, "but you deserve peace more. The Watch will always have need of good men. And the realm will always remember your name, Targaryen or Stark or both. Jon gave a small, sad smile. I never wanted any of this. But thank you for telling me the truth. I only wish, he trailed off. Ned squeezed his shoulder. There are many things I wish, Jon, but your mother would be proud. You carry her blood, and your father's. Remember their honor. Robb appeared then, looking uncertain. He put an arm around Jon's shoulder, a show of brotherly affection. You'll remain my brother, no matter what some scroll says, he said, voice unsteady. If you ever need anything, we stand together. The North remembers. Jon bowed his head. Thank you, Robb. Take care of father and the realm. I fear the battles may not be done yet, no matter what words were written here today. Though the council's final decree was set, the realm's acceptance was not guaranteed. There were rumors that Tywin Lannister might still march, that certain Reach Lords might reconsider, that Dorne might demand more than symbolic justice. But for the moment at least, the great lords had spoken in a single voice. Stannis was king. The news reached the streets, and the small folk went about their day more concerned with the price of bread than the name of the man on the Iron Throne. Within a week, Stannis arranged for a coronation in the Red Keep's throne room. It was a solemn affair with fewer festivities than Robert's boisterous celebrations. The new king wore a plain steel crown shaped like flames, reminiscent of the fiery heart that some whispered he worshipped. He named loyal men to his Kingsguard, including the redoubtable Barristan and Selmy, whose unwavering honor had guided him through the council's storms. He made moves to secure the city, though some factions still eyed him warily. Jon lingered just long enough to see the official coronation. Standing at the back of the hall, he caught Ned's eyes across the gathering crowd. He saw relief there and heartbreak. But it was done. The realm would not tear itself apart over him, not now. That very evening, Jon prepared to leave the city under escort from a new band of volunteers heading back north. He donned the black cloak that set him apart, packing what little he had brought. Robb came to say goodbye, clasping him in a tight embrace. Sansa and Arya found him too. Sansa offered a timid, sad smile, while Arya scowled with unshed tears in her eyes, telling Jon he had to come back soon and teach her better swordwork. Jon promised he would try. Finally, Ned arrived, looking older and more tired than Jon had ever seen him. You are sure you wish to go now? He asked quietly. The roads may still be unsafe. I swore an oath, Jon reminded him. And if there is peace in the realm, we have more men to guard against the threats beyond the wall. Ned nodded solemnly. You are the best of us, Jon. Rhaegar would have been proud. Lyanna would have wept with joy to see you grown. Remember that. Emotion simmered in Jon's chest. He embraced Ned, father and uncle and protector all in one. Then he turned away, black cloak snapping behind him, and left the Red Keep. The city swallowed him up, and a day later he was gone from King's Landing, riding north with a small escort. He would return to the Wall to face the gathering darkness there, the White Walkers, the Wildlings, all the unknown perils. In the weeks that followed, the Great Council's decisions rippled through the Seven Kingdoms. Tywin Lannister sent grudging word that he accepted the Council's findings publicly at least, while quietly consolidating his power in the Westerlands. Joffrey, sullen and furious, was spirited away to a keep in the Westerlands, with Myrcella and Tommen traveling alongside him. Cersei vanished from the capital soon after. Some claimed she had gone to Casterly Rock, others whispered that she had set sail for Essos to brood on vengeance. Renly was confirmed in his position, forging alliances with the Tyrells that might help keep the Reach content under Stannis' rule. Dorne cooled its temper, though the issue of Elia Martell's murderers would be an ongoing negotiation. The Northmen, satisfied that Ned Stark's call for truth had been heard, returned to Winterfell with Robb riding at their head, older and wiser than when he had come south. And Eddard Stark remained Hand of the King at Stannis' insistence, an honor he did not relish, but accepted for the good of the realm. Together, they began the long, arduous task of repairing the fractures in the kingdom. Laws needed to be reaffirmed, ravens sent to quell tensions in outlying regions, new taxes and levies examined to restock the crown's depleted coffers. In Winterfell's Godwood, had it been able to witness these events, the old weirwood might have shed tears of sap for Lyanna's son. The boy who was Targaryen in blood and Stark in heart, who had willingly renounced a throne that was arguably his by birthright, just as his father Rhaegar had once walked away from safety for the sake of love and a dream. Some in the realm would forever question if Westeros had lost an opportunity for a different reign, one perhaps less stern than Stannis's. Others breathed sighs of relief that the Targaryen line remained suppressed, for fear of repeating the Mad King's cruelties. But none of that changed the quiet truth. Ned Stark had called a great council after Robert's death, and by that bold act, he had prevented immediate civil war. He had revealed to the world that Jon Snow was no Snow at all, but a child of ice and fire. And in so doing, he had set Westeros upon a less bloody path, though not, perhaps, a path free of danger. For winter was still coming, and beyond the wall, the dead stirred. Time would reveal whether the realm would stand united under King Stannis's austere rule when the true darkness fell, or if old wounds would burst open again. But for now at least, Ned Stark had kept his honor. The realm had spoken with one voice in a great council reminiscent of ages past. And two young men, Robb Stark and Jon Targaryen, stood together long enough to lay the foundation for a fragile peace, forging a bond that no one, not even the lords of Westeros, could easily sever. In the end, the memory of that council would linger for generations. Some would call it the Stark Gambit, others the Council of the Broken Dragonbit. Songs might be written of how a would-be Targaryen king refused the crown and bowed instead to his vows. Whispers would spread that the White Wolf of the Wall was the realm's true savior in the days to come when the snows deepened and the night grew long. But for now, those were only whispers, drifting on the wind like so many seeds, waiting for the cold, dark soil of the future to bear them into fruit.